Yes, thanks so much for that introduction. My name is Naomi, and I work for a financial systems change charity called the Finance Innovation Lab, which I'll be telling you a bit more about. And today I'm going to be talking about the role of finance in climate action, but in particular, the sort of actions that you can take with your own finances to support the transition to a green and just future. I'm aware that finance isn't necessarily the most exciting topic. It's not something we necessarily always like to speak about. And it's also, I think, for a lot of people, not necessarily the area they first think of when they think about climate action or sustainable lifestyles. But what I hope to show today is why it's absolutely pivotal. Thinking about finance and your own finances is absolutely pivotal to live in a sustainable lifestyle and thinking about climate action, but also that it can really, really be quite fun and interesting too. So, as I mentioned, we are the Finance Innovation Lab, and we're all about answering this question: how can we build a financial system that serves people and planet? And our vision for a financial system that serves people and planet is made up of sort of 4 core principles. So one is that it's democratic. So everyone can participate in the way that the system works and in shaping it. That it's sustainable, so that it meets society's long-term needs and also the environment's. That it's just, so that it promotes diversity and equality and protects human rights. And also that it's resilient, so that it provides security and stability for everyone and really supports the real economy. And we believe to get to a financial system like this, we need transformative systems change. So for any of you that are familiar with the financial system in any way, shape or form, really, you'll know that this is very, very far from where we're at the moment. So we don't think that sort of little changes will get us to where we need to be, especially if we're thinking about climate change. So we work on transformative systems change, and particularly the 2 things that we try to shift are mental models, so the sort of social and cultural mindsets, narratives, values about what finance is, what it's there for, what its purpose, what it could be, and also power dynamics. So who has power in the system, whose decisions matter, whose interests prevail. And these are two things that we try to shift. Our particular role in this is building power. So we're a very small organisation. There's just 6 of us. The financial system is obviously huge, and we're really grateful to work alongside lots of amazing other amazing organisations who are also working on financial systems change. So our role is really to build the power and support others who are doing this work. In particular, we do this through 2 ways. So one is cultivating a powerful community of systems change makers, and that is my job as head of community. So I basically spend my time finding and supporting different people that are building a better financial system. That might be activists, it might be campaigners, civil society organisations, it might be finance professionals that are working within finance and trying to change it from the inside out. It might be innovators, entrepreneurs, academics, students, you name it. Then with that community of systems change makers, we also work on high impact initiatives with clear leverage points. So we kind of identify where do we think there's really, really potential for stuff to shift, and that's where we put our energy. And that we do that across sort of 4 main program areas. So one is shifting mainstream finance. So we recognise that we're not going to get to a better financial system unless we bring the big guys along with us. And so we work with mainstream financial institutions, and particularly people within those institutions that are trying to change them for the better, and to support them to do that. For that programme of work, we have an explicit climate focus for the next few years, because we really see, one, that it's absolutely urgent that those banks shift if we're to meet our climate goals, but also that there really is potential that they will do that because of external pressure and so forth. So for our shift programme, we're really, really focused on climate at the moment. We also work on growing purpose-driven finance, so growing the part of the finance sector in the UK which is explicitly purpose-driven, and I'll speak a little bit more about what that means in a minute. and influence in law, regulation and policy. So finance is a very, very highly regulated system. So we recognise that it can't change much if the regulation and policy governing that system don't change too. So we work on trying to change that in line with our vision. And fourth, again, building our transformative community, which is my area of work, which is basically building and nourishing the network of people that make all of that other work possible. But today we're going to be talking particularly about climate and finance. And from some of the comments that I heard in those reflections from your breakout discussions earlier about people thinking about switching their bank account and so forth, it may be that sort of the connection between climate and finance is something that many of you are already familiar with. But I think that it's worth sort of underlining here. So why is finance and the financial system so important when we talk about climate action? Well, you'll all know the sort of phrase, money makes the world go round. But when we think about the financial system and the power that the financial system has, what it's really able to do is to decide where money flows to and where money doesn't flow to. And what that means is that the financial system to date has played an absolutely huge role in getting us into the current mess we're in regards to climate change. Fossil fuel expansion has been funded by the financial system in terms of investments, in terms of loans, in terms of projects being insured. So it plays an absolutely huge role in where we're at. However, it also has the potential, and in fact sort of needs to really play a huge role in the solution to climate change, because in the same way that those financial products, loans, investments, insurance have supported fossil fuel expansion, they also must now support the transition to renewable energy and to all of the other things that we need for a just transition. And there's just a few examples that I've got here to sort of illustrate this. So in the 4 years after the Paris Agreement, 35 major banks funneled $2.7 trillion into continued fossil fuel expansion. And actually the UK banks are the worst in Europe for this. At the same time, though, the UN estimates that 2.6 trillion, so less and over a longer period, so it's not the best news, was invested in renewable energy over the 10 years since 2010. So really, when we think about the sort of changes and the scale of change that we need to transition to a green economy, a just transition, finance is going to be absolutely key to that. But as I kind of mentioned earlier today, because this is the Climate Action Lab and it's all about actions you can take, I really also want to focus on sort of tangible things that you can do to support the financial system to shift. And in particular, how you can use your personal finances, so your money, basically, for climate action. And there's a few reasons why I think that this is so important and really has to be part of any conversation we have about climate action, and particularly any conversation we have about sort of sustainable behaviour change and sustainable lifestyles. So those of you that have been sort of thinking about sustainable lifestyles and behaviour change for a long time, and will be very familiar with this conversation, and I imagine that you've already had it over the sort of last few days, but it's about the kind of tension between focus on individual behaviours or individual lifestyle choices, individual consumer choices, and systemic change, and how you balance the focus on those two things. And I think, you know, in most areas, we would say that that you shouldn't need to choose. You know, those two things aren't mutually exclusive. You should be looking to do both. But sometimes it can be difficult when you're thinking about where should the emphasis be put? Should it be on the tangible things that we can all do, but that might have quite a small impact, or the big things which, you know, could have a huge impact, but you'll never really know if what you're doing is making a difference, or it might take a very long time for you to know that. And for me, finance is a really good example of where these two things really meet and interact. And that's partly because as I hope you'll see over the course of this presentation, one of your biggest climate impacts, if not your biggest, is probably your finances. Is probably where you choose to keep your money. And because of that, when you're thinking about individual lifestyle choices you can make, It's one that absolutely has a direct relationship to the rest of the system because the impact is so big. Equally, though, as also I hope will come through for this presentation, by making different choices, you can actually sort of build the new system that we want. And so your individual choices has a direct link to the kind of systemic change that we need. Equally, I think it's a really important area because in comparison to some other things, it's actually quite easy. And this sounds a bit counterintuitive because generally we think of finance as quite complicated and technical, and often it is. But what I mean by it's easy is that generally when we're thinking about taking climate action with our personal finances, these are changes that we only need to make once or a few times. So it's not like other behavior change things where, you know, every time you go to the coffee shop, you need to take your keep cup. And of course, I hope that you do that. Every time that you need to travel, you need to cycle. And of course, I hope that you do that too. But with the sorts of changes that we're going to talk about, once you've made the change, it's done. And so it's actually, I think, one of the easiest things that you can do. I also think that it's quite accessible. And again, that sounds a bit counterintuitive because finance is complicated. Often when people think about personal finance, they think, oh, that's only for people that have a lot of money and a lot of investments. But actually, what I'm going to talk about is relevant for anyone that has a bank account. And if you don't have a bank account, but you're going to get a bank account, it's relevant for you too. And where finance is also maybe different to some other areas is there isn't necessarily a cost premium on ethics or on sustainability. In some cases there is, but there isn't necessarily. So it's not something which you know, people are excluded from because of cost. And actually, in a lot of cases, the more ethical providers are also more responsible in terms of their practices. So they are, you know, they're better for you as a customer too. So if anything, they're kind of more accessible in that way. And last but absolutely not least is that engaging with your finances is good for your future as well. And I mean that, you know, in the sense of course, looking after the planet, but also in terms of your financial future and your own sort of financial resilience. And I say that as someone who has gone through this process myself over the last sort of year to 2 years. And, you know, I can say from my own experience that prior to thinking about my personal finances through a kind of climate action lens, I was not engaged with my finances at all. You know, I had a bank account, I got paid into it. I sometimes looked at how much I was spending, I often didn't. That was kind of about it. I had a workplace pension, never logged on, didn't think about it. And it was actually through thinking about how I could align my finances with my values that I then started to actually engage with my finances and thus make better financial choices, which have been, you know, good for the planet, but also hopefully will be good for me in terms of my own financial security. And so I think, you know, for those of us who our motivation is really thinking about sort of the future of the planet and issues of climate and inequality and so much and so forth, this can be a way that we can engage in something and actually get excited about something that otherwise we might just sort of want to put to the back of our minds and not think about. So let's talk action. Before we do that, I do need to give an obligatory disclaimer, which people always need to give whenever they're talking about finance, which is that this is not financial advice. I don't think that anything I say is going to sound anything like financial advice, but Hawkwood did tell me that they really want people to leave with sort of tangible actions and next steps. And so to enable that, I am going to mention some particular financial products and some particular financial service providers so that you know where to go and look. But please don't interpret anything I say as sort of endorsements of particular products or particular financial service providers. I'm just sort of pointing you in the right direction of where you might want to go and look. But nothing that I say here is advocating for particular products or not. Some of these products I might have used myself, some I won't have. But hopefully it gives you a good place to start. So the first thing I want to talk about is how through your finances you can support what we call at the lab purpose-driven banking. So towards the end of last year, the lab did a report with one of our senior fellows, Dr. Gemma Bone-Dodds, looking at the purpose-driven banking ecosystem in the UK, looking at what banks exist in the UK that offer customers banking services that are truly focused on social and environmental purpose. And what she found, so first what she looked at is, well, how do you define a purpose-driven bank? And she found that there was essentially 4 key elements. So one was mission, so a bank which has a clear mission which is related to social and/or environmental aims. However, as many of you may know, it's not uncommon actually for big corporates that might not have great social environmental practices to also have quite shiny and appealing mission statements. So what she kind of uncovered is where that mission actually translates into being purpose-driven in the banking sector is when that mission is also embedded into the ownership structure of those banks, the governance model, and the culture and leadership. And when all of these things are aligned around a common mission, then we get a truly purpose-driven bank. What she also found is that although the purpose-driven banking ecosystem in the UK is comparatively very, very, very small in comparison to the rest of the systems, in comparison to the whole UK banking system, and is also very small in comparison to its counterparts in other European countries and indeed even in the United States. From a consumer perspective, so, you know, as an individual looking at what your options are, there is actually a fair bit. Could definitely be bigger, and that's part of the lab's work at the moment, is growing that sector. But actually, if you're an individual and you're looking for a purpose-driven bank, you do have options. So I'm just going to talk about the sort of 5 sorts of institutions that she found. So the first is ethical banks. So these are fully fledged banks, but that have ethics and social environmental practice built into those elements that I highlighted. So their mission, governance, ownership, and culture. One that many of you may have heard of is Triodos Bank. It's a sort of global leader in this area, but there's others as well. There's Charity Bank that predominantly lends to the charity sector, and there's others as well. Another is building societies. So building societies are mutually owned organisations, again thinking of ownership, and there is actually over 40 building societies in the UK. So again, it's quite a sizable amount. Some building societies focus on particular regions. So for example, there's Yorkshire Building Society, I believe there's Leeds Building Society, there's quite a few up in Scotland as well, but some are nationwide, as you know, the name nationwide would suggest. And for a list of all building societies, you can go to the membership organisation for building societies, Building Society Association, and you'll find them all there. But yeah, I included nationwide as that's one that you, many of you may have seen and may be aware of. And, you know, I think for a lot of people, they would just sort of see nationwide as a bank. It offers all of the same services as probably your bank does, but actually it's mutually owned. And that means that its customers, which are actually its members, have a say in how it's run. Another one that many of you might have heard of or be interested in is Ecology Building Society, which has an explicitly environmental focus. We also have credit unions. So credit unions are essentially financial co-ops. So they are owned and governed by cooperative principles. They are non-profit, and they're essentially savings and loans clubs. So they're a place where you can save money, and you can also take out money, take out loans, generally for really affordable, responsible rates, particularly when you compare them to the other sorts of loans that you might be able to get on the market. ABCUL is the Association of British Credit Unions. So again, if you want a list of all of the credit unions, there's over 250. You can go and look there. The credit unions are kind of organised by a common bond. So again, sometimes that is a geography. So I'm based in Glasgow in Scotland, and Scotland has a very vibrant credit union sector. So on my local high street, there is a credit union which serves this area of Glasgow, and there's many others like that across Scotland. But it could be other common bonds. So there are credit unions which are for particular sorts of organisations or particular professions. There's two that I've highlighted here because these are credit unions that are open to quite a lot of people. So ComSave Credit Union is open to employees of quite a lot of really big organisations, but also members of one of the big unions. I believe it's Unite. So anyone who's a member of that union can be a member of the credit union. And so actually it's open to loads and loads of people. The Co-op Credit Union is a credit union that employees of the co-op supermarket and phone co-ops and other co-ops can be part of, but it's also open to members of the co-op. So if you have a co-op supermarket membership card, and if you don't, you can buy one for £1, then you can also join this credit union. So regardless of where you live, and even if you don't have a local credit union, there should be one that you can join. There's also community development finance institutions. These are generally loan providers, so responsible loan providers. Responsible Finance is the membership body there. And again, if you go to their website, they will provide a list of different responsible loan providers. A couple that we work with are Fair Finance and Moneyline, but there's many, many more. And there's different sorts of CDFIs, some of which serve businesses, so provide affordable loans to businesses, and some which support individuals. And finally, last but not least, something that's really, really exciting and that we're supporting within the lab community is regional mutual banks. So this is a new sort of fully fledged bank, but that are co-ops and that are serving particular regions. So the idea is that they're really, really grounded in the local economies and serving the needs of the local economies, again, with a focus on sort of financial inclusion and sustainability. So really, really exciting. The two that are, this is a sort of national project, there's different banks seeding up in different regions, but the two which are most advanced in their development are Southwest Mutual, which is in the Southwest, and Avon Mutual in Bristol and surrounding areas. They're not yet trading. So you can't, if you're residents of those areas, you unfortunately can't open a bank account with them yet, but you can follow them online. And if you are based in those areas, I'd really encourage that you can do that so you can support their development and hopefully sign up when they launch in the not too distant future. So what does all this mean for you? So essentially, one way that you can support this purpose-driven finance sector to grow and to become a bigger part of the financial sector is to move your money to support these sorts of banks or banking institutions that put people and planet first. Now, you may have heard this quite oft-quoted stat, which is that you're more likely to get divorced than to change your bank account. That's the stat I always hear in discussions about finance. Whether or not it's true, I don't know. But actually, switching your current account is exceptionally easy because of something called the current account switch service, which basically means that all of the heavy lifting is done for you. Your direct debits and your standing orders, your contacts, all of that sort of stuff is automatically transferred over. And so if you do want to move, if you're currently with a big bank whose practices you don't agree with, who are funding climate breakdown, inequality issues and so forth, it's actually really, really simple to switch to a more ethical bank. What I would also say in regards to current accounts is, unfortunately, there aren't loads of options at the moment for ethical current accounts. So the sorts of institutions that I just outlined, not all of them offer ethical current accounts. But because of that, it's quite an easy move to make because, excuse me, there actually aren't that many options. So you can kind of do your research and decide which one is for you and then make that switch quite easily. Then where it maybe gets a little bit more exciting is when you're thinking about saving an ethical savings account, because of the building societies and the credit unions that I mentioned, there are loads and loads of options for saving ethically. And so there, what I'd really encourage you to do is do your research and find one or maybe more than one. Some people like to save in different accounts. That's right for you. You might be particularly thinking about how can you support your local economy. So you might want a local option. You might be thinking particularly about environmental issues. So you want one with an explicitly environmental mandate. You might be really concerned about the financial impacts that COVID has had on financially vulnerable people. So you might want to support one that explicitly is looking at financial inclusion. But there's loads and loads of options, and it can actually be, a really, really interesting exercise to look through them and decide where you'd like to save your money. Next, where it gets even more exciting, is talking about pensions. So pensions, again, not necessarily the most fun topic for everyone, but pensions are absolutely vital to climate action in my view, because it is just so much money. So there is £3 trillion invested in UK pensions alone, and a lot of that is in the sort of companies that are funding climate breakdown, exploitation, and other social environmental issues. But what's amazing about this is actually our money. You know, that 3 trillion, it's not just owned by millionaires or billionaires, it's owned by you and me, everyday people. Because pensions is money that you kind of accrue over your entire working life, and hopefully by the end it's a relatively substantial pot, and because it's actively being invested. So this is also something people often don't know. People often sort of see pensions as a savings account. It's not. It's an investment account. It's investing in companies. The impact of your pension is often a lot bigger than other lifestyle choices. And actually, I think for a lot of people, their pension is their biggest climate impact, so more than travel or diet or other consumer choices. And actually, most people want their investments and want their pensions to think about people and planet as well as profit. So Make My Money Matter is a really, really exciting new campaign that I'm really pleased to be involved with, which is basically campaigning for a world where our money, and particularly our pensions, goes to building a better future. And they have sort of 3 streams. So one focused on individuals, so getting individuals to act to get their pensions aligned with the future we want. Another for organizations, so getting organizations to choose pensions that support a better climate future, and also working with government and industry for the sort of system-wide change that we need. And I really just wanted to highlight this because I think this really makes the point that I mentioned earlier about the sort of connection between the individual and the systemic in regards to climate action. Make My Money Matter only launched last year. And launched in the context of a pandemic, had to move what was supposed to be a big sort of public campaign on the streets all online. But this is already what they have been able to achieve. The UK's largest corporate pension scheme has set a 2035 net zero target. Many of the other big schemes have set other targets. So it's really, really huge. And this is just so much money that we're talking about, which is being taken out of fossil fuel expansion. So again, what does this mean for you? Well, there's several actions that you can take on pensions. One of them, and probably one of the most impactful and easiest, is you can switch your pension. So you are likely, if you haven't done this before, you haven't thought about this before, invested in the sort of default fund of your pension provider. But most pension providers will also offer a more ethical fund. So normally, if you log in to your pension account, you can, in 1 or 2 clicks, change that fund. Now, depending on who your pension provider is, that might mean a big change in terms of the sorts of companies. It might mean less of a change. Different pension providers have different policies at the moment. But at the very least, it should mean that your pension wouldn't be funding military or tobacco companies. And in a lot of cases, it would mean that it wouldn't be funding fossil fuel expansion either. However, because we know that we need this sort of larger change, what I'd also really encourage you to do is take campaigning action. And so Make My Money Matter that I mentioned has sort of 2 concrete actions that you can all take. Again, it will just take a couple of minutes, if that. One is to join their campaign and sign their petition. And the other is to write to your pension provider asking them to commit to net zero. And they've got a template to enable you to do that. I also wanted to highlight PensionBee, which is an organisation which is often spoken about in this space. They basically provide a tool that allows you to consolidate all of your pensions into one place, and they have a kind of climate-friendly portfolio. So if that was something that you were wanting to do, if you've got lots of different pensions and you want to bring them all together, that's also something you could look at, and there's other options as well. And then there's also investing. So this is probably what people most often think of when they think about sort of finance and and climate. But I really wanted to start with those other things because I wanted to stress that it's not only if you've got, surplus capital and you're in a position to invest that you can take climate action with your finances. But if you are in that, then obviously you can do that as well. So there are loads and loads of options, and to be honest, they're growing every day, of ways that you can invest in companies that are building a better future. And I have just highlighted a couple here, but there's many, many more, and I'll share some resources at the end where you can find about some more. But a couple that I wanted to highlight. So one is Abundance. This is an organization the lab has worked with from the very beginning, really. And they allow retail investors, so people like me and you, to invest directly in environmental, largely renewable energy and social projects, including social housing, from as little as £5 using a really, really simple online platform. They also have recently introduced a new product allowing people to invest in the green transition of local authorities, so councils, which is a really interesting product because it is very low risk, because the chances that the local authority won't be there anymore are pretty slim. But it's also kind of lower return. So in some ways it's more comparable to kind of a savings account. It's not, you're not going to get loads and loads of money back from that. But it is a way that you could fund local authorities to go green and support them, and also make some money while you do that. Triodos Bank, who we spoke about earlier, also have loads of sustainable investment products, including sort of portfolios where you can invest in multiple different projects that they've screened for ethical and social standards. They also have a crowdfunding platform, I believe, where you can invest directly in projects if you'd rather do that. The Big Exchange is a new retail investment platform from the Big Issue, and it offers again ethically and socially screened portfolios. So that's not investing directly in particular projects, but it's invested in a range of projects. But they're all impact funds, so they've all been chosen because of their social and environmental credentials. And again, it's online and it's very, very easy to use. And FX is one that kind of compiles information sort of across the sector. So I think it lists Triodos and some other things, but they also have their own direct investments that you can invest in. In particular, FX has quite a lot of community shares. So if you're interested in funding community shares, which there's sort of a range of stuff, there's renewable energy, I believe there's been some farming projects, an organisation that we worked with called Equal Care Co-op, which is a social care cooperative, platform cooperative. They also raised through FX. But those are just a couple of the websites that you could look at if you did want to start investing for good. And finally, last but absolutely not least, is get talking. So obviously, we don't talk about finance that much with our friends and family. We certainly don't talk about finance with a climate lens that much. But as I've hopefully demonstrated, it's actually really not as scary or complicated as it might seem. And so talking to people about this sort of stuff and encouraging others to make those changes can be really, really, really impactful. And to highlight this, I just wanted to share this really exciting project that I've also been really lucky to be involved with from Friends of the Earth and Enroll Yourself, which is a peer learning organisation called Own It, where they basically set up this really amazing model where they trained up women to host conversations between themselves and other women about money with a sort of climate and ethics lens. I was really lucky to be one of the first hosts that did this, and it was an amazing experience for me and actually sort of kickstarted this whole journey that I've been on. And just through these conversations of, women getting together around a dinner table, obviously on Zoom during the pandemic, most of these people are not people that have financial expertise, background in finance or ethical investment or anything like that, but just through having conversations, talking about people's hopes, fears, concerns, sharing resources and so forth, they've already been able to move over £1 million, which is huge. And their goal is, through continuing to support these sorts of conversations, they want to move $1 billion by 2030. Now, this is a particular project that if you're a woman, you can definitely get involved with. And you'll just drop me an email and I can send you a link. But even if you weren't going to get involved, particularly in this project, the principle still remains. So, if you're making changes with your finances, talk to your friends and family and ask them if they've thought about it too. And this is something that I do all the time, and might be a bit boring for some of my friends and family, but it really, really is so impactful. And as I said at the beginning, I think when you sort of combine also the consideration about people's financial futures and their own financial security. Some of you might be parents, and that might be the sort of thing that you talk to your children about. When you combine those two things together, it's really conversations that we want to be having with those around us. So just a quick recap of what we've spoken about. So a few ways that you can take climate action with your finances is: one, switching your current account to a purpose-driven institution; two, saving with purpose; three, taking action on your pension, which might be switching your pension, it might be supporting the Make My Money Matter campaign, it might be doing both; four, if you're in a position to invest, if you are thinking, if you don't currently invest and you're thinking about it, please do your research, and there's a lot of sort of reading on what investment is and the risks involved that you should look at before you do that. But if you are in that position, that's something that you can consider. And five, multiply your impact by talking to others. There are also other things that you can do, which I won't go into in detail, but there are other financial products and services out there, stuff like mortgages, insurance, credit cards, and again, you can choose more ethical providers for those. You can also think about your organization's finances. So particularly if you're in a leadership position in your organization, but even if you're not, how can you make sure that the sorts of changes that I've been talking about are also happening for your organization? So obviously pensions is the big one, but equally, who does your organization bank with? Why doesn't your organization move to a better bank? And finally, you can follow and support financial systems change charities and campaigning groups, obviously the lab, which is us, but also a couple of others, Share Action, Positive Money, and there's many more as well. And here is a couple of resources to get you started. So goodwithmoney.com is my absolute go-to. I absolutely love this website because they break down these kind of complex issues into really, really simple and easy to understand language. They do in-depth sort of reports on different sustainable investment funds and pensions and that kind of thing. So if you're thinking of investing or you really want to dive into it, you can read their sort of longer reports, but they equally do short blogs that, will just take you a couple of minutes to read. In particular, they have a feature called the good lists, where they list the sort of top ethical options for all different financial products. So it'll be like top 5 ethical current accounts, saving accounts, investment funds, or whatever. So that's like the best place to start and has been really, really useful for me in my journey. Make My Money Matter campaign to take action on finances, and Ethical Consumer, which I know was mentioned earlier. They also have some money and finance pages, which are really, really useful. But if I just wanted to share those links because they're kind of simple and hopefully easy to remember. But if you'd like more information or further resources on this, please feel free to contact me because I literally love speaking about this stuff and would love to talk to you about it. And this is how you can find me and find the lab and contact me. So I'll just leave that up in case anybody wants to note it down. And yeah, that's it for me.